Welcome to chapter 7 of the book of Mark. We continue with Jesus being in the Galilee, going back and forth, different cities. It begins in verse 1. And the Pharisees gathered together to him. The synagonte is the verb for gathering. We have the synagogue, comes from that. So the Pharisees were similar to today's Hasidim. The Jews, they probably didn't wear anything close to the same type of clothing, but their adherence to the Torah and the law and the Mishnah, as we'll go into a little bit here, was very similar, and they were the ones that were considered to be the ones the Pharisees continued after the removal of the Jews from Israel in 70 A.D. And some of the scribes, and the scribes were the legal experts who, as far as the Mosaic law and a religious group, there's all the Sadducees, but doesn't mention them here. We have a grammar from this word, grammateon. Well, having come from Jerusalem. So they came all the way up from Jerusalem because they had heard the things that Jesus was doing and wanted to find out. And seeing certain ones of his disciples with common hands, that is to say unwashed, while eating bread, they complained. So right away, what are they doing? They're looking to find fault. This is pretty much what they do. They look to see anybody that's not doing something completely according to the law. Then they find fault with that. Later, Jesus calls them hypocrites because they were breaking the laws themselves, but yet they're the ones that run around looking to find people that are breaking them instead of looking in the mirror. And it says, for the Pharisees and all the Jews, unless they washed the hands with a fist, they do not eat, holding the tradition of the elders. So apparently they wash some certain type of a way. I'm not exactly sure how that is. But the important part was that they held the tradition of the presbyteron, the elders. We have the Presbyterian Church run by the elders. And coming from the markets, if they should not baptizonte, we have the word to immerse, they do not eat. And many other things there are which they take on themselves to hold. Immersion of cups and quart pitchers and brass kettles and dinner beds. The Mishnah, which I have right here, is a book that was written, translated by Herbert Danby. It's available through Oxford University Press. And it just goes into all types of details of the washings and the Sabbath, what was considered something that was wrong. I'll just read one here, and you can pick one up if you want to read all these things. And it says, thus if a poor man stood outside and the householder inside, and the poor man stretched his hand inside and put anything into the householder's hand, or took anything from it and brought it out, the poor man is guilty in the law, and the householder is not guilty. So it just goes on and on into these this ad infinitum as far as this details of the laws that they were making up that weren't in the Bible. Therefore, some of them, of course, were, but most of it was added on. Thereupon, the Pharisees and the scribes asked him, why do your disciples not walk according to the tradition of the elders, but with unwashed hands they eat with the bread? And he answering said to them that, well, Isaiah prophesied concerning you, the hypocrites, as it has been written, this people esteem me with their lip, but their heart is far at a distance from me. And that is in Isaiah 29:13. And in vain they worship me, teaching as instructions the precepts of men. And that's in Isaiah also. It's at the footnotes at the bottom of the page, and it'll tell you where these places are. For leaving the commandment of God, you hold the tradition of anthropon, men. Baptismus, immersions of quart pitchers, and poterion. We have the word potable comes from that word. So the immersions are washings, dipping these utensils into the water. And many other such things you do. And he said to them, well, you annul the commandment of God, that you give heed to your tradition. For Moses and said, esteem your father and your mother, and let the one speaking evil of father or mother come to an end in death. So to take care of the parents was the number one thing, but they are, it says, but you say, if a man should say to a father or to a mother, it is korban, it is a korban offering, which is a gift offering. Whatever from out of me you should derive benefit. From what I can gather, this would be like if you had quite a lot of wealth and you didn't really want to give it to your parents, you wanted to enjoy it all your life. You dedicate that wealth to the temple, so you don't have to get rid of it right away because it's going to the temple. But the parents need help, but you have dedicated your wealth to something else, and they are suffering for it. That no longer you allow him to do anything to his father or to his mother. So apparently they allowed this to happen, and the father and the mother suffered, thereby voiding the word of God by your tradition which you delivered. And the tradition was, this was a tradition, but the word of God was up there, was saying that let no one esteem your father and your mother. But they weren't esteeming them. They were esteeming their money, more or less. And many similar such things you do. So there was a lot of things that they were doing that were man-made, traditions that were the opposite of what God would have a man to do in the Word. And having called all the multitude, he said to them, hear me all and perceive. Well, there is nothing from outside of man entering into him which is able to make him unclean. But the things going forth from him, those are the things making the man unclean. So he's basically adapting the law in a way. It was changing the way that they saw the law. God, of course, had unclean animals, and if a person ate them and so forth, they were considered unclean. But here all of a sudden Jesus is showing that, yes, these things may have been the way but he's bringing a new way. The Jews today, they know that Jesus changed everything around from what it was at the time of Christ, as far as everything in their world was turned upside down, and they called Jesus someone that basically a man that came and changed all of their traditions, and then Paul joined in to it later. And Jesus continues, he says, if any has ota, ears to hear, let him hear. Akuato. Acoustics and ota, we have otoliths, ear bones. And when he entered into a house from the multitude, his disciples asked him concerning the parable. The parable here, so it's not a story as such like a lot of the parables, but his finding fault in their traditions. And he says to them, well, thus also are you senseless? Do you not comprehend that everything from outside entering into the man is not able to make him clean? So this is basically the parable, I suppose, would be his saying that it's not what you eat that makes you unclean, but what here, for it enters not into his heart, but into his belly, and into the bowel or the toilet, it goes forth. It can be either way on that word, Greek word. Cleansing all the foods. Well, I think it's the bowel because the insides are what cleanses. It doesn't go into his heart, but into the belly. The heart is a figure of speech. The food still doesn't go into the heart, but the things, he says, and he said that the thing going forth from out of a man that defiles a man, for from inside, from out of the heart of men, evil thoughts go forth. Well, we know that this is a figure of speech because the heart, as we know it, is a muscle, and evil thoughts don't go out of the heart. But it was thought at that time that they used the word cardias for where thoughts came forth. Now, we would use the mind, but you have to understand it. On the English word heart, cardias is what it is, but I don't know if I would have translated it 500 years ago with the King James. I don't know if I would have used the word heart. I might have used from out of the, I don't know what it would be, the mind or the feelings of men. Evil thoughts go forth, and he names them. Adulteries, porneia, harlotries, we have pornography, murders, frauds, desires for wealth, wickednesses, treachery, lewdness, a wicked ophthalmologist, it has to do with the eye, a wicked eye, blasphemia, transliteration, pride, folly. All these evils from inside go forth and defile the man. So he's bringing up the condition of man. The Pharisees were looking at the outward condition of doing things, but the inward condition could be completely evil and corrupt. And this is what Jesus is bringing out to them. And from there, having risen up, he went forth into the boundaries of Tyre and Sidon. We'll go up to our map, and we can see that he was Gennesaret, I believe, and so they went all the way up here past the border up where it says Syrophoenicia. This was a Syrophoenician woman mentions here, and Tyre and Sidon is right up above two cities. So he goes up there, and then he'll go back down to the Decapolis afterwards, which is the 10 cities, all in this area over here, which is today Jordan. And he entered into the house, wanting no one to know, but was not able to be unaware. For a woman, having heard about him, of which her young daughter had an unclean pneuma, an unclean spirit, a demon, having come, fell at his podos, the feet. You have a tripod. The pod is a derivative. And the woman was a Greek, Hellenes, spoke Greek, and she was a Syrophoenician, a Syrophoenician by genus is a derivative. So she spoke Greek, but she was from that area, which is Lebanon today. And she asked him that he should cast out the daimonion, ekvali. Ballistics is casting, and from, is from, cast from out of her daughter, Thegatros. We almost have a transliteration there with a th and the, Thegatros. And Jesus said to her, allow the children first to be filled, in the imperative, for it is not good to take the bread of the children and to throw it to the little dogs. And she answered and says to him, yes, O Lord, but even the little dogs eat from the crumbs of the children underneath the table, humbling herself that she was realizing that the little children was Israel, and this is Jesus is feeding Israel, but yet she says that even the little dogs, she's putting herself down as a little dog, lower than the Jews in Israel that he was from, and on her humbling herself. Today anybody that reads the Bible see this humbleness of this woman who cared about her daughter, and she didn't care about her pride. Epiphania, which was one of the things it mentioned before about the pride going forth, but yet she had the humbleness. And he said to her, on account of this word, go. The demon has gone forth from out of your daughter. Here again we see a belief with healing. We mentioned in the last chapter that whenever healing took place, it had some type of belief was there. Sometimes it mentioned the word belief. Jesus mentioned it because of the belief. He uses the word here, but it was a belief. Her actions proved it. The demon has come forth from out of your daughter. And having gone forth into her house, she found the demon having gone forth, and the daughter being laid upon the cleanies, recline on the bed, so she could tell that the demon was gone by the behavior apparently of this little girl and being laying upon the bed. And again, having come forth from out of the borders of Tyre and Sidon, he came to the Sea of Galilee in the midst of the borders of the Decapolis. And I showed you that before. You can go back and look at that map, and it went down to the eastern side of the Sea of Galilee to the 10 cities area. And they bring to him a deaf mute, stammering. Apparently he couldn't hear, but when his talking would be a stammer, whatever. And they appealed to him that he should place his hand upon him. Hira, chiropractor, the derivative, man who uses the hands to manipulate. And taking him away from the multitude in private, he put his fingers into his ears, ota, a dactylus. The dactyl has to do with fingers. And having spit, he touched his tongue, glosses. Now, it's a tongue, not a figure of speech, but this is the actual tongue. And having looked up into the heaven, he moaned. It's interesting that when Jesus does so many things, miracles, he looks up into the heaven. He doesn't look down at the earth. That should tell us something. He's by looking up to the Father. The Father is up, out, way from the earth, not inside of the earth. And Jesus is looking towards where he came from. He's an alien on a planet that needs deliverance. And he moaned, and he says to him, Ephatha, which is in the Syriac language that they Jews spoke at that time. It wasn't biblical Hebrew, and which is, be open wide, the imperative. And immediately were open wide his hearing faculties, and the bond of his tongue was untied, and he spoke rightly, orthos, orthopedics, straightening out bones. And he warned them that they should speak to no one. Well, again, he does this all the time. But as much as he warned them, rather more extra they proclaimed. Whenever they did that, it meant Jesus would have a harder time doing certain things because they're doing the opposite of what he said. He had a reason for warning them not to speak. But before he did that, he had to go and stay in the wilderness rather than in the city, in a house. And then it took more time to get there and come back, so people couldn't hear him as much, because he was on the road. And more exceedingly, they were overwhelmed, saying, he has done all things well. Both the deaf he makes to hear, and the speechless to speak. So Jesus has proven who he is as far as the power that he has to all around, and they're bringing people, and he will continue in the 8th chapter. It will be Go up here to the title, and he feeds another great amount of people around the same area. Chapter 8, and I hope you'll join us, and God bless.